It's always great to talk to Matt LaCroix. If you're not familiar with Matt, he is the author of The Epic of Humanity, The Stage of Time, The Illusion of Us, and he is really a world traveler on a number of different levels. What I like about Matt is that he is revealing evidence of our ancient past through the ancient cultures of Europe, Middle East, and now South America. And his work, I think, is cutting edge. We're going to learn a little bit more about what he's been up to. We haven't had Matt on the program for at least a year. And so I'm looking forward to today's program. So, hey, Matt, welcome back to Earth Ancients. Great to see you, bud.
Hey Cliff, great to see you again. As you said, it has been over a year since we last talked, and I hadn't been to Turkey and Bolivia or Turkey and Peru yet. And now I've gone to Turkey twice and also Peru. So it has been an amazing year of exploring ancient sites and finding new things and connecting with lots of new experts. It has definitely been an incredible year. I would say 2024 was the best year of my life. It was really just quite a remarkable year. I feel very, very, very blessed for it.
Now, your company's Ayanis group or the Ayanis team.
Ayanis Legacy.
Oh, Ayanis Legacy. Okay.
Yeah.
Talk about give us more updates on your new group because we talked on email about Lydia De Leon as a contributor, as well as her husband, Arturo, is part of your team. But you got some others. Talk a little bit about the growing team of experts.
Yeah, it was very small when we last talked. It
I
was just a
remember.
couple people, and
Yeah.
now it's grown to like 10 different experts. It is quite large. We're going to be managing a team that is very unusual. I don't believe anything like this has ever happened before with top academics that are joining forces. So not just like, say, passionate researchers, but
Yeah.
actual academics that are very much believe in the narrative that we are taught for a lot of these locations, especially Lake Von and Eastern Turkey, is not correct. And so what we are doing is, and I will preface by saying that anyone who's part of the team that is involved in the documentary is not necessarily um, saying that these are lost civilizations. We are exploring the hypothesis and exploring the evidence to see if that's true. So experts, I feel very lucky to have, we have famous geologist, Dr. Robert Schoch, and
Fantastic.
he's incredibly inquisitive and interested in a lot of these sites. He had a chance to explore with me, Ayanis and Kefkalesi and Shavus Tepe and some others, Korzut as well, which was, we can talk about, that was an incredible experience. We did not plan on being able to see what is right now the newest archaeological site in the world. In fact, when we were there just this past October, they were just uncovering the upper part of the temple megalithic structures, and we were not allowed to photograph or to take any film, but we were allowed to see what they were doing, and they have found another set of ruins and very beautiful hewn andesite and basalt stones, like some of the finest I've ever seen in the world, just like perfect, like razor sharp edges. And they're just emerging that from the dirt and the soil around that area, and they're finding an entire temple site on top of this really cool volcanic knob that sits over a valley over towards Lake Von. What I find really interesting is that a lot of these sites around Lake Von are not on the highest mountains.
Hmm.
They're on these volcanic type of energetic components. And we see numerous places around that area that are like that. Like, for instance, Shavus Tepe, Altan Tepe, Korzut, Ayanis, Kefkalese. They're all on these like volcanic or limestone type of protrusions that are very interesting energetically. Anyway, so Robert Schoch joined the team. Hans Orheim, a Swedish archaeologist, was in
Mhm.
Turkey with us as well, exploring the sites.
What is he known for, Matt? What is Hans' specialty in archaeology?
Hans Orheim specializes. He's done a lot of things in Peru. He's actually been part of some teams down in Peru. He's done a lot of excavations in places where he lives in Sweden.
Hmm.
So excavating like Nordic and pre-Nordic
Ah,
cultures.
okay.
So he brings that area of expertise. He's written a number of books where he's also explored Egypt, and he is very much a supporter of the idea that there are, evidence of lost civilizations that predate the Holocene in the from an earlier time period before the Younger Dryas. And so
Mm.
those experts are just some of what we've had join. We've had Robert Edward Grant join. We have, of course, Paul Wallace on the team. We have interesting a little backstory. When we were at Kefkalese last, we ended up meeting with the archaeologists that were there because they're still excavating that site and they're
Right.
finding incredible new basalt columns and pillars that are emerging there. Beautiful structures. And one of the archaeologists named Omer Tanyurek is one of the ones that runs Kefkalesi, and that's one of the most important sites to me of all. And so we got a chance to, they brought us down to a storage area down in Ajijivez, a town right below it. And in there, it blew my mind because I didn't know this very important bas relief, huge, 4 feet by 4 feet, that I had been studying that had come from that site that's now being housed in Ankara. Turns out there was 7 of them in the storage area down below that I didn't even had known existed. And so we got a chance to see those firsthand. Anyway, a long story short, that person, Omer, ended up being so fascinated with the discussions of what we're doing and following me online. And we had discussions for months and months and months about these sites being potentially pre-Urartian. And he has subsequently joined the team as well. And he's a very high profile archaeologist. Again, he's one of the top archaeologists at Kefkalese. So we have some very significant and prominent individuals who have joined. And I can add some more as well. Another very big one is there is a famous Turkish dive expert, videographer named Tosin Seylan, who's quite well known in Turkey, who dives primarily in ocean environments,
Mm.
off of like the Red Sea and off of in parts of the Mediterranean. But he did a project where he dove down in Lake Van to basically film these massive underwater structures that form from the alkaline environments underwater. They're like towers built out of organic matter. They're very, very unusual, really spectacular types of landscapes.
Hmm.
Anyway, he was one of the first to extensively dive in Lake Van. He dove in a number of different areas, one being Akdamar Island and a few others. And when he dove off of a Jijivez, which is right off of Kef, he ended up discovering these underwater ruins in 2017 under Lake Van that had never been known about. And that has subsequently really blown up and become one of the focuses of the documentary. And we can get into that as we go along. But
Yeah.
Towson has subsequently joined the team, and he will be leading us when we dive down and film these underwater ruins for the world to see.
Do we have any dating on any of these underwater ruins? Because obviously, if they're underwater, they could be pre-flood, pre-diluvian, and extremely old.
Right now, so the first thing is when Towson discovered the underwater ruins,
Hmm.
the Turkish some individuals, I will just say, some individuals did not believe what he had found. They actually were like, no, like we don't that can't be true. And he came back with details about the specific location and he had all kinds of video of it. And at first, because of the unusual nature of the ruins, meaning so they're extremely large blocks, they're basalt likely. We have to investigate, very finely carved. and they're found at a depth of 80 feet
Yeah.
underwater,
Yeah.
which makes them by far the deepest ruins that we've confirmed anywhere in the world. There
Mm.
are there are ruins off of parts of the Mediterranean, off of Greece, off of Santorini. There are ruins off of Egypt, but they're not anywhere near that depth, and they're not large megalithic ruins, meaning the
Right.
structures being built. And so these ruins under Lake Vaughan are incredible enigma. And so archaeologists didn't know how to place them. They were like, oh, are they Urartian from 2800 BC?
Right. Yeah.
Or are they like medieval? That was even a consensus that some archaeologists were trying to propose that they were not even from that time, but actually earlier, um, from like medieval times. Clearly, they had no idea when they were built, but the problem is none of that makes any sense
Yeah.
because they're 80 feet underwater. And in order to get fluctuations with that Lake Vaughan at that level, you would and I confirmed this. I spent a lot of time actually talking to Chat GDP, which I have found is a very, very good way to bounce ideas off of. So because it searches the entire internet. It,
Right.
it has the knowledge of all the internet. And so I've had some very, very good conversations actually with Chat GDP asking about some of my theories and some of the things I'm proposing to see how valid it considers them. So looking at all the data, and the consensus that's come back is that the only way that Lake Vaughan could have fluctuated to that level, which would have been 80 to 100 feet lower, which is insane for a lake. It's
Yeah.
not like we're talking about a tidal ocean system or something like that. In order for a lake to be able to fluctuate to those kinds of levels, it identified what I did, saying it had to have been from some kind of major geologic event,
Yeah.
which I have subsequently identified, and it has confirmed that I mean, maybe the first person to propose this theory, but also that it has a lot of scientific backing. And again, I asked, like, is there any holes in this theory? Like, is there anything that you can think of that would not make sense with this theory? And subsequently, it came back to verify and confirm that we may be dealing with a situation where, because of the unusual nature of the lake and how it was preserved, and then the events that led to it flooding, it actually may give us, and you can appreciate this, Cliff, the first dating that we can actually have besides Göbekli Tepe and the water erosion on the Sphinx enclosure that we have. We don't, because that's all we really have, because you can't date
So are you
stone.
saying that Chat GPT can give you a reference for possible uh, source for this ruin, or what are you saying?
When ChatGDP confirmed the dating evidence that I was proposing as being valid and sound. And I'll give you a little background. And of course, we're going to be going there to film diving with the whole team in the end of June, early July.
Right.
So the what makes this such an unusual situation, I'll go into it a minute for a few minutes here, is that when you have a lake that fluctuates naturally based on, like, let's say rainfall patterns, you can only get a type of variation that is a few meters because of the fact that lakes tend to have a a more consistent level than something like I mentioned, like an ocean or something, right? Where you get huge tidal changes, and then you can get water that locks up in ice caps in different parts of history and can lower all that. But that doesn't impact lakes because
Hmm.
they're not attached to the ocean. So in order for lakes to fluctuate, that can only happen based on rainfall patterns, things like that. And so what we identified here is looking at is that how can you have ruins that are 80 feet, 80 to 83 feet underwater in the bottom? Now, the first question that comes up that archaeologists have asked me, did it slide into the lake?
Hmm.
First, and the first answer is we do not believe it did because the ruins are spread over an area of a half of a kilometer, of an entire kilometer. underwater. And not only that, the structures themselves are in extremely good condition.
Hmm.
So if you had a structure from earthquakes or seismic activity that slid into the water, you would probably just get a bunch of rubble because it
Uh-huh.
would tumble down into the lake. Well, the ruins under Lake Vaughan are remarkably intact, showing that it didn't slide into the lake, that it was built and the lake rose above it. Um, the second thing that we have is we have incredible symbols that we've connected around the world that we can get into in a minute. But the dating evidence is really remarkable. When I was researching Lake Vaughan, I found something unbelievably interesting that, Cliff, I think, it'll be one of the focuses of my new book that I'm now a third of the way through, called The Missing Key of History. And this is going to be one of the focuses of the documentary and the book.
Mhm.
This is what we're talking about right now. Diving down to this will be like diving down to like a new Atlantis. I think it's going to be groundbreaking. Now, the reason I say that is that in order for Lake Vaughan to, number one, preserve the ruins, it's because it's the most alkaline closed basin lake in the world,
Hmm.
meaning that it has no outlets. And what it created was the alkaline environment created an environment of preservation where everything has been preserved underwater remarkably well. And that what does not happen in normal lake systems with currents and having a non-alkaline environment. You actually will get a lot of severe erosion on structures and things,
Yeah.
inability for those things to kind of disappear or disintegrate. But because of the alkaline nature, it just preserved everything remarkably well. Now, that's the first thing. But why is it a closed basin alkaline system? The lake used to have a major river that exited called the Murat River in the
Hmm.
southwest part of Lake Vaughan. And that at that time had been what maintained lake levels at 80 to 100 feet lower than they are now. Because if you have a basin and you have water coming out and then water coming in with rivers, you're going to always have a system where it's maintained in balance because you're losing water and you're gaining water, right? So you get like a nice balance of the levels. Except what happened was there was a geologic event in right during the end. This is what's wild, is it's confirmed by scientists that at the end of the Pleistocene, so the Pleistocene would be uh, the the Pleistocene is the epoch that occurred last in history during the Ice Age, before the Younger Dryas catastrophes 11,600 years ago, in which we went into what's called the Holocene. So
Right.
during the end of the Pleistocene, there was a massive eruption. In fact, one of the biggest eruptions we know of occurred in a mountain called Mount Nemrut. Now, this not to be confused with its sister Mount Nemrut that is in central Turkey with all the heads on,
Heads.
with the
Yeah, I
eagle heads.
saw it.
Totally
Amazing.
different Mount Nemrut.
Yeah.
They're not the same. This Mount Nemrut is on the southwest part of Lake Vaughan, and it's one of the largest calderas in the world.
Hmm.
And what makes it unique is that the entire mountain exploded. The entire top blew off and buried the area and may have even played a role in destroying what I believe was a civilization. And we can get into that. But when when the area became populated and explored, starting with Austin Henry Layard, who was actually a very famous Assyriologist down in Iraq, he visited this region and they went to Mount Nemrut. And so, since the 1800s, Mount Nemrut has been one of the most studied volcanoes in the world
Hmm.
because of the unusual nature of the explosion that it blew off its top and just it has an enormous caldera with lakes inside. And so
Mhm.
scientists have been studying it for hundreds of years. And they've taken soil core and rock core samples of the lake, ash cores, and it has very extensive dating, which is very interesting because that dating, being as comprehensive as it is, ends up lending itself towards us
Mhm.
now because of how good the dating is. So what they determined was that during the end of the Pleistocene, somewhere around the Younger Dryas catastrophes, which is incredibly interesting in its own, considering the upheaval that was going on in the world at that time, the mountain exploded exploded, and a lot of its debris fell to the southeast of the mountain. And what it ended up doing was it blocked off the Murat River
Uh,
completely with like an entire mountain. And the Murat River got totally cut off. And it was the only river that exited Lake Vaughan.
hmm.
And so subsequently, you still have rivers coming into the north. So what happens, Cliff, when you block off the only outlet to something, right?
Right. Water rise. Yeah.
Rises up, but not just a little, rises up a lot.
Hmm.
Because I mean, it's like again, it's like the bathtub analogy. If you have a if you open the tub up a little bit, but you're still putting water in, the water will maintain itself. But then if you plug it up, you're just going to get that water just overflowing. And that
Yeah.
is what we're potentially looking at, is that we have a dating mechanism, maybe the best we have in the
Hmm.
world, to say if you get fluctuations of 80 to 100 feet suddenly flooding over these ruins underwater, and they are now at 80 feet deep, it means that those ruins predated that eruption
So
of
what's a
Mount Everest.
rough estimated on a date for this underwater ruin?
The eruption is described as being in the later Pleistocene. We don't get an exact date,
That's
but
pretty
does it
old
but
right
does
there.
it but does it really matter? I mean, because we know the Pleistocene ended at 11,600 years ago. So it means that these ruins may have the best mechanism for dating of anything in the world. And we may actually be able to prove that lost civilizations existed finally.
Yeah, it's a real challenge for Orthodox science, though, when you look at Göbekli Tepe. We were at Karahan Tepe last year, which is about, I think, 11,000 years old, but they found a new Tepe, and it's above by, I think, 30 miles, that's dated to 14,000 years. And they keep getting older and
Of course.
older and older. And we don't hear about it in the National Geo because it's shocking the hell out of these universities. How do we uh, get a sense of where they stand in history? It's rewriting history, right? I mean, that's what we can
Yeah.
consider.
Well, so the first thing is our academics have fiercely attacked the dating in Göbekli Tepe because radiocarbon dating has some areas where people argue that it's not accurate.
Right.
Okay? So that's why when they came out with the dating of Göbekli Tepe, it shifted it caused questions to open up, but did not officially shift the narrative. Like for instance, you're not going to learn that we have civilizations that go back to that
Yeah.
early time period. Academics still have not accepted it.
They can't deal
And
with that.
they also have not accepted the water erosion on the Sphinx enclosure. That's something that's still a conjecture, and it's like being fiercely fought over. But how do you argue th- these underwater ruins being 80 feet deep and having symbols around the world, by the way, that we can talk about, but also having a major geologic event that gives you a criteria for when that existed prior to? So I think it really is significant. We are going to come at this in a way where all of these experts that are the top experts in their field are going to come together, analyze all of these structures. Again, we have two archaeologists, so Hans Orheim and Omer ten Jurek. We have the original discoverer of the ruins. They're going to be diving down. Robert Schock may be diving down with him, as well as Hans and in Arturo. And we're going to be photographing and filming this for the world to see. And our goal is to not just say you have to believe in lost civilizations or you have to believe in this, but present evidence to let the audience decide for themselves, what we're looking at. And the plan is to, in the hopes maybe in the future, to be able to do some kind of a soil analysis around the site, maybe even something more. But we're going to be moving up to greater levels of exploring this mystery. But that's the excitement that I came up with doing extensive research 3 or 4 months ago when I was looking into the site, and I've been doubling down by again checking other experts, checking ChatGPT, trying to see if there's any holes in it. But right now, it looks like a sound theory in which we are going to be further exploring. So we have a whole team of about 10 experts that are all going to be going to these places and exploring the validity of them being built before the Urartian time period.
It's amazing. It's really exciting, Matt. I can see your enthusiasm. Before we leave Turkey, though, I want you to describe some of the symbology that's been found on these underwater megaliths.
Yeah.
I saw a photo, I think it was on either your website or your Facebook page, of a very clear image underwater of a, it looked like a flower motif of some kind.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
amazing. Do we see that in any other parts of Turkey or
we
anywhere
do.
else?
So when I was investigating these areas, it's interesting how certain pieces of information reveal themselves at certain times. I find that to be incredible because you'll be looking at something 100 times,
Yeah.
and then on the 101 time you look at it, your mindset's a little different, and all of a sudden something reveals itself.
Yeah.
On the Kef bas relief, there's an area next to the step pyramids where there are these tetrahedrons that 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 show around each other. And at first, you don't really notice that there are symbols embedded within those tetrahedrons. And as I was exploring, I saw that there were actually flowers of life.
Ah.
Six, specifically six spokes, flowers of life, over and over and over again on that. Now we know the flower of life is one of the most important ancient symbols in the world. It's in the Osirion in Abydos, Egypt, on those huge granite hewn pillars that are there. Which, by the way, Nassim has done analysis of that flower of life symbol down there, and he is determined that it is not. This is wild, but he's determined that it's not carved into the substrate, the stone.
Hmm.
And this might be mind blowing for some to consider if they're just hearing about it now. He believes it may have somehow been part of embedded into like the atomic structure of the stone, like beneath the surface, almost something that was embedded into it but was not carved. Like mind blowing, and I don't know if there's anyone still analyzing or studying that, but we may have in the Osirion, it may be a situation where it's an unknown type of technology that had embedded that in there. But anyway, that flower of life was six spokes, very important because 3, 6, and 9 are the magic esoteric numbers that Nikola Tesla talked about for the design, the creative design of everything in the universe. And so I find it very interesting that that it was repeating itself over and over again in Turkey. So just going back for 1 second, the Kef bas relief, all of the step pyramids have 3 levels, and there's 3 of them over and over and over again. And then the flower of life symbol that's right below it has 6 spokes.
Hmm.
And the fact that there are 3 of these step pyramids, and if you were to add 3 plus 3 plus 3, you get 9. So over and over again, you're seeing 3, 6, and 9 everywhere.
Hmm.
Now, I had noticed that a while ago and was like, that's really interesting. That's embedded in that. And then I discovered and came across at the bottom of the altar at Ayanis is also, it's hard to see, it's carved on the along the bottom part of the altar is also the six-spoked flower of life. So when those came into my life, it was at the same time, which is why it's so weird and wild because I've been studying this for like 2 years now. The same time, images that I had never seen of the underwater ruins came to the surface, and lo and behold, on one of the capstones on top of that structure was the six-spoked flower of life symbol
Hmm.
on that as well, showing that it was one of the most important symbols we now had in around Lake Vaughan for this mysterious civilization that gives us a direct, seamless connection to Egypt, which is really wild because we had a lot of other connections based on other symbols in Peru and Bolivia. But now we have another whole avenue that is very exciting to explore that shows that. And what I find really wild, Cliff, is that when you look at the structure underwater, the top part has been severely eroded, where like some of the stones on top all broke off,
Hmm.
and there's one stone left, one on the top, and it just so happens to have the one that has the flower of life symbol.
Ah.
Well, just imagine if that stone had broken off.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have any symbols on it as far as we know. And so that those symbols, along with everything else we're exploring with the sun cross and the step pyramid and the doorways and the T-pillar design, has really opened up what I believe, Cliff, is like a lost language.
Hmm.
Because we determined that, and I don't believe when we look at Peru, you look at Bolivia, you look at Egypt, and you look at Lake Von, that there are no writings that exist anywhere in those locations on these structures. Now, one would bring up the cuneiform that's at around Lake Von on some of the structures like Chavus Tepe and Ayanis, but we have been exploring with evidence to show that all of the cuneiform may have been written on there by the Urartians to claim ownership over their creation, whereas this civilization that's mysterious that I believe built them all, I believe they left behind their language was the language of symbolism. And that was how they communicated knowledge and teachings. That was their language, was through symbolism.
Interesting. Before we leave Turkey, what is this underwater structure or complex at Lake Von? Is it a temple complex? Is it a what do they think it is? A
They
small,
think it's a castle,
oh, a
which
castle.
well, I want to strongly pause there though, because the fact they call everything a castle, because the
Yeah,
Urartians were a warlike culture. They were at war with the Assyrians constantly. And so they did build castles on top of many of these sites. Ionis has a Urartian castle built right on top of it. Right on top of it, just like a lot of the others, like Chavus Tepe. But that doesn't mean that was their original purpose. Now, if you have a military installation, you would not see symbols like the flower of life being this symbol that's on that, right? You'd
yeah,
have like spears and swords and
yeah,
things that would establish it as being a military or nothing, as being a military type of place. Now, the fact that there are symbols related to creation and balance and harmony for the universe shows us that this was some kind of a temple at the edge of the lake. Now, it's also impossible, it's not a coincidence at all that Kef Kefkalese is right above where this is, up on a
hmm,
mountain. So imagine an ancient temple up on top of a mountain looking over the lake, and then another temple is on the edge of the lake. And that's what I believe that this was, is some kind of an ancient temple near the edge of the lake. How close it was is a mystery. But I can tell you that it's
fascinating.
if it's found at 80 to 83 feet underwater, they wouldn't have built it with the water lapping it right
Yeah,
on the edge of it. It would have, it would have been a little ways away from the lake because that's not
yeah,
how people construct things. But that, if anything, that gives us further evidence for its age of when it was built, considering how deep it is. And so it
yeah.
creates an enigma for archaeologists because scientists and archaeologists cannot explain the underwater ruins under Von. They can't. They
Do
cannot
you think
explain.
there's a hesitancy with the Turkish universities to really dig down? Like, I mean, I'm seeing this in Egypt every year. They're finding more excuses to block photographs, uh, cameras, everything. And they're kind of regressing in some ways in terms of exploring fully these ruins. I mean, every time I go there, it seems like they're stepping backward, not forward, and using new technology or whatever. Just give us a hint of what you think about.
There, there was what I would call the old guard that was that was part of the ivory tower of archaeology. Now, I want to strongly point out, though, that there are a lot of really good archaeologists
Oh, sure.
working
Yeah.
on these sites now that have nothing to do with that. So I just want to really strongly preface that because that old guard, though, which is dying out now,
Yeah.
but that has definitely played a hand in protecting some of these some of this information from coming out. I don't know if protecting is the right word. Preventing some of this
Preventing.
information,
Yeah.
I would say preventing some of this information from coming out. And I do think that that's real. I think that if anyone even just spends 10 minutes studying Zahi Hawass in Egypt, you can clearly see that that man does not want certain
No.
archaeological discoveries to come to light. I was um, at a dinner with Robert Schoch, talking to him extensively about how he was part of the sonar ground penetrating radar work that was done on the Sphinx,
Yeah.
on the paw of the Sphinx, where they found a large subterranean chamber, very, very well established, that actually made news headlines around the world in journals, and everyone was like excited to see what they'd find. And they found, not only was it a subterranean opening underneath the paw, but they saw some kind of artificial objects like stone, carved stones that were like very precise in 90-degree angles, or things that were not random, like a cave.
Hmm.
It's something that was an excavated structure. Now, subsequently, he told me the story of what happened was that Egyptologists that were led by Zahi Hawass, when all of that news was coming out, everyone's like, let's dig down and let's find it. Like, let's go see it, right? They did something very misleading. What they did is, instead of going to the specific location under the paw to do a drill hole analysis, a drill core to go down and see if there's anything there, they went off of it enough that when they drilled down, they didn't find anything. And
Uh,
they said, look, there's nothing there, when it was very deliberate that they missed their mark. And then that was what subsequently closed off the conversation, to say that, oh, well, they made a mistake, there was maybe a small natural cavity or something, but it wasn't anything significant. And that temporarily closed the door on discussions for what was underneath the Sphinx. Because, I mean, anyone who studies this with an open mind, number one, knows the head of the Sphinx is way too small for the body. It's disproportional. There's ample evidence now that it was recarved during the dynastic Egyptian time,
right.
which ties in directly to the cuneiform writing in the Urartian time period that I'm explaining, was not from the earlier time, because in Egypt we have hieroglyphics all over the place that were not done by the same builders of the original temples and pyramids and structures. The
Right.
Egyptians wrote stuff all over it. So we're seeing a recycling and a claiming of these places. And I mean, how would you have a more definitive example of taking ownership of something like you built it than the
Right.
Sphinx? Imagine the dynastic Egyptians coming in and finding an incredible place that they knew was very important, and recarving the head to be a pharaoh, when we know that, first of all, the Sphinx is a guardian, which is why it's a lion facing Leo. It's embodies Leo. It's a
Hmm.
guardian to a subterranean entranceway to what many around the world, from Hermetic texts to Edgar Casey and others, have very much have stated is some kind of a library, some kind of an ancient library. And so it makes complete sense that the Sphinx is a guarding those entrances to the subterranean world under Egypt. Now, someday in the future, we will get access to those, but in
Yeah.
the meantime, and I tell that story because it's an example of showing how there are still very important archaeological discoveries and understandings that are being blocked, that are not being allowed to be
It's
seen.
so disappointing to hear that too, Matt. I mean, I hear this all the time from independent researchers, even independent archaeologists who get up against the administrations of different countries, the archaeological community, and they're blocked from further investigation, and they're blocked from using new technology. It's very disappointing. Well, it's like, will these discoveries come out in our lifetime? And sometimes I have to wonder. So,
I think that, to me, the ivory tower is a great example. It's unmovable, yet it's still firmly being protected and guarded, and nothing can erode it. But the problem is, the ivory tower of archaeology has been built, like Graham Hancock says, on a foundation of sand. And no matter what you want to think, that foundation will erode. And
Yeah.
when it does, it'll be like a domino effect. And I believe that domino effect is already happening now. The amount of academics that have joined this documentary to explore this is beyond my expectations I ever could have imagined
Yeah.
that are now doing this. I feel very, very lucky to have such top academics and scientists involved in this. But that is just the perfect example, in my opinion, of the narrative shifting.
Mm.
When so many more people are becoming open-minded to saying, look, I think the old narrative has holes in it. It's not, we're not being told the full story. It's time to investigate it because in the end, what is science? It's the never-ending search for the truth based on evidence and data. You don't stop looking for something because you have some predetermined thing that you've determined. You don't stop looking. It never ends. If something disputes or disproves something else, the scientific method, in theory, being objective, must always adhere to that. And
Yeah.
our scientific method has become deeply eroded and infiltrated by money and interest from outside individuals that do not wish for it to change. And
Yeah.
many people will ask me over and over again, why? Why would you protect it? Why is it something that can't shift? Because, and I'll give you an example of why. In this conversation with ChatGDP, I asked it a very, very interesting question. I said, ChatGDP, what would happen if we found out and had evidence to show that ancient prehistory civilizations, long before we're told that ever existed, were shown to have a basis around spirituality and esoteric concepts? Okay. I said, what would happen if that was found out to be true? How would that shift our understanding of history? And its answer was it would profoundly shift everything we think about the
Of
human
course.
story.
Yeah.
Because let me tell you why. The human story is discussed as being coming from Paleolithic primitive hunter-gatherers that were kind of warring and fighting. And then when we emerged during 6,000 years ago, during the subsequent next several thousand years, which is true, during the time period of like 5,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, during that time period, we were very warlike. Everything we did was defined by conquerors and empires, and that's true. And so our basis for where human civilizations began comes out of a thinking of being a warlike, conquering culture.
Mm.
That defines everything for us because people think, oh, so if it's old, it comes from a time period of being warlike, primitive, fighting, and then gathering up to a gradualism of where we are now. But
Mhm.
if we learn that no, it's in fact not the case at all. If anything, we went backwards. If anything, our story went backwards and we eroded down into a lower consciousness, but we started from a place of high consciousness and connection, it would fundamentally change, Cliff, our entire perspective on reality, on
Right.
who we are. Everything would shift. And I think that is the fundamental reason why history has been protected from being changed.
Wow. That's pretty heavy, man. I We could talk about the Middle East forever. I want to get into some of your comparative research. You took a trip to Peru in October of last year, and you went to one of my favorite places, which is Cusco, and you visited Sacsayhuaman. What was the intuition that you felt the need to go there? Was it, I know you went for a tour, but you discovered some very important similarities, didn't you?
Yeah, Peru is one of the locations that we are filming for the documentary. So I have studied Peru for decades.
Right.
I hadn't been there yet, unfortunately, and so I was eager to be able to go and finally get on the ground, boots on the ground, and explore them. And I mean, that was an amazing trip. I went this past October, and I had a lot of. I want to thank Robert Edward Grant for that wonderful trip. Had a lot of opportunities to explore the sites with my
Right.
partner Jenny, and we were able to see things that I had never seen before that connect seamlessly back to Lake Vaughn, and be able to be in a place. I mean, to me, Cusco is the most fascinating ancient city in the world because it's the only ancient city that it's a modern city that's built on the foundations of megaliths, ancient, high precise megaliths. Two different kinds of megaliths, though. The one type is a giant polygonal type of megalithic stone, like we see at Saskatchewan, which is, by the way, is basically like part of Cusco. It's on the mount, it's on the hilltop, the mountaintops that surround Cusco, and it's
Right.
part of that. And I mean, you saw that discovery they just made just recently with the huge underground subterranean tunnel system that goes from the Coricancha underneath Cusco all the way to Saskatchewan. And
Yeah.
some of those I went in some of those subterranean areas in Saskatchewan, and they go more than a mile between them. We know they were both connected. Now, when you're in that city, you also see a second type of building. You see these very not quite 90-degree angle, but very precise edge cuts of stonework around the Coricancha and other structures. And it's so bizarre, Cliff, because there are museums and shops built in in the interior that left the original stonework. It's so weird. So you'll be going in. There's an alpaca museum in Cusco with like a coffee house like attached to it. And you go to the door, and right to your right, there's like giant megalithic blocks still from the original wall that
Yeah.
are there on the edge built into the existing structure. And people are walking around the city not realizing they're walking by stones that are like 12 plus thousand years old. And so it's a beautiful city that
Yeah.
has layers of different building, has what I consider three distinctive layers of civilizations that have been there. The
Yeah.
pre-Incan, which is clearly classic pre-Incan work. Then
Yeah.
you have the Incan crude stone, which is all over the place right next to it. And then you have the Spanish work, then with recycled stone and others built on top. And so you're walking through a city with three different epochs of history that have occurred there.
Yeah. Talk about your impression of the Coricancha because it's the most unique stone building I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's has very similar stonework, first of all, to areas of Ayanis. The basalt stonework and how they fitted it and the same cuts are
Yeah.
present in both locations. And so that's what got my interest a lot. And we will be filming there
Oh,
to show that as well. And then when I went into the Coricancha, the thing that I didn't know about was there's a huge altar stone or something like that that sits to the left side when you first come in, and it has these specific designs with these extensions, four corner extensions that stick out. And when
mhm.
I saw that, I couldn't believe it, Cliff, because I've never noticed it in pictures or video before. It's the same design of the pillar structure we see at Kef and Ionis all the way across the world in Turkey. Uncanny. The same design type. And so we keep seeing these crossover parallels to motifs and designs that are very similar that really bring up the question that we're exploring about whether or not the South American ancient megalithic sites like Pumapunku and Tiwanaku and, Cusco, the Coricancha, and Ollantaytambo, and all of these places, Napa and Glacia, whether or not there's some kind of a sister extension. If you were to think of the concept of Atlantis being like a global civilization, not just a place, a civilization, right? This would very much adhere to those concepts about being a place that had almost the same type of work carrying over from around the world
Mhm.
that has not only that, but like the comparisons with Viracocha, right? The primary god of South America
Right.
being nearly identical to Haldi in Lake Vaughn. So we're seeing a lot of parallels that are very mysterious and very exciting because I feel like we're on the brink, Cliff, the brink of unlocking the secrets or beginning to of an entire chapter of human history that will radically redefine our entire understanding of who we are in our past.
Do you think and I always use this analogy, which is blueprints being passed among these ancient civilizations. Is there a similarity between what you saw in, say, the Lake Von area and in the Cusco stone masonry?
Yeah, they look like whatever technology had been used to make
Yeah, that's what I
both
thought.
was the same. Now, what was that? We have a lot of speculation, but first of all, I can tell you the Incan civilization was only around 300 years. In fact, it's one of the shortest civilizations we know of, but they're being credited with building everything that has no evidence that, first of all, they ever built it. They left no writings behind. And specifically, when the conquistadors, Pizarro and others, came into that region, they were told by the people there that they didn't build them. We
Yeah,
have that evidence. We know that they said they didn't build them. But they said what they did say was that they were built by the gods, which is wild to think about. Some kind of a celestial higher order thing that was not them. And they had no idea how they built them. And they knew that it just predated them. But like you were just bringing up, whatever technology, meaning not iron and bronze age, because
yeah,
that's
no
what
way.
these civilizations would have had access to, whatever tools or technologies built these blocks is completely mysterious today. In fact, humans today, our civilization, we don't build structures like that anymore.
Yeah,
Everybody always comes around like, oh, we could do that. But I'm like, we don't, though. We don't build anything like this. And it really brings up questions about whether or not we could in the same kind of way. Everyone, it's funny. We talk about our grandeur and our technological sophistication, and yet, even with all that we know now, we have no idea how they did some of the things that they did before. How did they cut the blocks all these the same size? How did they fit them all together? How did they lift some of them?
yeah,
50, 100 tons, 1,000 tons? How did they lift them? How did they move them? How, Cliff, do we have places like in Ayanis with beautiful, huge andesite blocks put together? How do we have seamless symbols carved between blocks? How do they do that? If you were going like this and chipping away and trying to make these, number one, how would you not make a mistake? If
yeah,
they're all fitted together, imagine that. Oh, Cliff just, oh shoot, Cliff messed up the edge of the cross here. Let's remove all the stones, carve new ones, put them back in again, and then try to do it again. It doesn't make any sense because the way that they seamlessly pass between blocks, it's almost like they had like a laser technology. And it's been speculated by some, like Randall Carlson and I have been talking about whether or not it's some kind of like a plasma technology. But we honestly we don't know. We have no idea how they cut, moved, put them in place, and then carved symbols and motifs into them. We don't know.
yeah. Tell us a little bit about Oyen and Tempo in the Sacred Valley. I'm always curious because there seems to be a lot of telluric energy around these megalithic stone sites. And you posted some photographs. I think one of the stones that it's a wall, each stone weighs about 80 tons or an amazing amount of, but I've talked to people who have been there, and I haven't been there for over 20 years. And there are people who are sensitive are noticing that in certain parts of the walkway leading to those areas, there is an energy
Yeah.
present.
Yeah.
You can actually feel it.
I definitely feel those in ancient sites. Ollantaytambo Tambo is a very magical, enigmatic, and mysterious place. The Inca were clearly there building on top, but I would say of anywhere that it's more obvious, it's definitely there because the
Hmm.
Incan crude stonework is sits on top and adjacent to these colossal pink granite and regular granite stones out of Ollantaytambo that are, like you brought up, they're massive. They're
Yeah.
massive and they're beautifully put together, seamlessly put together. And on the stones that you're referring to, there's a type of almost like an altar site that has six giant columns that
Right.
are over 50 tons each. These enormous blocks. There's six of them. Again, that's sacred number six. And on those blocks are sets of three Chicanas with three Pumas that repeat itself over and over again. Now, the Puma is like a guardian, like we see in Ayanis, they use the griffin in the lion.
Hmm.
And in Ollantaytambo, they have these Chicana designs, right? These stepped pyramid designs, which I will point out, the entire concept of the Chicana came from the step pyramid design in Vaughn that's just stacked on top of each other. So if you take the step pyramid and then you put another one on top and below, and you combine them, you get the Chicana. And so you get these further parallels and connections across the world. Now, we made a big discovery at Ollantaytambo that I did not know about, not just the important spring called the Bagno de la Nusta, which has the same design that we were exploring, but there was a stone, a megalithic single stone in the courtyard that's been super overlooked. I've never heard anyone mention it or talk about it. And I saw it and I was like floored because here you had an exact replica of the three-level step design, not the full Chicana, just the top part, like we see in the Kef bas relief, with the door cut right in the center of it. It's like it's like identical to the Lake Vaughan area. So, like you said, we have some kind of a blueprint of sacred knowledge that teachers seem to be traveling around the world and then creating a sister type of civilization that emerged out. And then what do we find? Whatever that super global civilization, all everywhere, right? We have evidence in Mitla, Mexico, throughout Peru, throughout Bolivia, even
Hmm.
parts of Ecuador, throughout Egypt, Baalbek, Lebanon, Van, Turkey, throughout parts of India and China and Japan. We have evidence of similarities of a civilization that seems to emerge that all shared this types of technologies to create these unbelievable things like Kailasa temple in Ellora Caves, India, the largest
Oh
single
yeah.
cutout of a mountain, basalt, volcanic basalt in the world. None of the hundreds of tons of debris has ever been found that excavated it. Like the whole thing just exists and nobody knows how it got there.
Hmm.
This is part of what we are exploring as being a history that has been not acknowledged at all about us being from a time period and from the lens of being very powerful, very smart, very sophisticated, and having a very different kind of civilization than we do now. And if anything, I could say, I think that we could learn more from them than they could learn from us.
Yeah. I'm curious, Matt, do you think that because we don't recognize their science and their science being earth-based, telluric energy,
Yeah,
geomagnetic
yeah.
energy, that we discount them and we prefer not to consider earlier civilizations? Or is it just the arrogance of this current scientific paradigm that we don't look to past epochs as being sophisticated?
I think it's a combination of both. So the core concept, and I hear this all the time. Someone will be like, "Oh, I love ancient civilizations," and then they'll show me some primitive stone monoliths from like Scotland or something.
Yeah.
And they're like, "See?" And I'm like, that area was under ice caps. It was inhospitable during the Younger Dryas and before. It's not the kind of stonework I'm looking for. And
Right.
it always comes up over and over and over again. And I'm not saying those sites aren't incredible,
Yeah.
but it comes up over and over again that if something is old, it's primitive. That mindset has been entrained in within people that anything that is really old has to be primitive. And I
Yeah.
think that that actually is a big one because it causes people to overlook any of these enigmas and mysteries simply because, well, it couldn't have been old because it's not primitive looking. So it immediately gets thrown into the category of, well, it's probably not as old. So that's the first one. The
Mhm.
second one is what you brought up with this idea that anything that's grand and sophisticated couldn't possibly be from that old a time period because it doesn't go along with the fact that maybe we're not quite as uh like you said, our egos and our idea that we're the pinnacle of all of civilization may
Right.
not quite really be right. And I think that is a hard pill for some to swallow when they talk about this, because I don't know why people need that or think that that's important. The other thing I think that is a little bit frustrating to me is that people want something ancient to be from where they live. And if it's not, they're not as interested. And I'm like, what does it matter? We're just humans. We're earthlings. Why does it matter if it's where you live? Nationality and pride from where you live it shouldn't matter your curiosity of something ancient. But anyway, those are the things that I think get in the way of the thinking mindset that we should be shifting to.
Yeah. And on that note, Matt, you have are working with Lydia. Lydia has a wonderful book where she believes these ancient temples were set on what she calls geomagnetic anomalies purposefully,
Yeah.
because our ancestors understood that these energies were beneficial to us physiologically, mental,
Yeah.
body, and spirit. And what is her contribution to the to your group? Because her work is so unique, and what Arturo, her husband, is doing is also unique. Are you reclassifying temples now? Because that's what I see happening, is the reclassification of ancient sites to possibly be not only older, but to have been built by this telluric energy
Yeah.
science.
Yeah. So Lydia is a geobiologist, and
Right,
she brings, with her husband being a sacred geometry architect,
right.
we bring they come together as a wonderful core package to explore sites like Ayanis and others, like we were just mentioning, for what are the properties energetically, like you said,
Okay.
telluric energy and geomagnetic properties. What kind of fields are created or left over from these things? What was their intention? A lot of I find frustration in a lot of comments and people that say, "Why do you call everything a temple? Why is this a temple? Why can't it be something else?
Yeah.
Why would we not think it's something like that? First of all, let's separate a temple from having a religious purpose. I think maybe that puts people off because
Yeah.
of the nature of some monotheistic religions today. I
Right.
want to just, we need to separate those very, very differently. First of all, if you were creating a structure that had alignments to stars and the energy of the earth, and you were had something that was based on this divine knowledge of the cosmos and balance of earth, it would be a type of temple. That's the whole purpose behind it. It's not a place where people would like be like an Airbnb or something where they would like go decide laws and rules like a courthouse. No, it's the ancient lost civilizations valued things very differently than we did today. And I think to them, the idea of creating sacred places that were designed based on movements of the sun, based on energies of the earth, was the ultimate thing to build. There was nothing greater than that. So it shouldn't be a surprise to many that functionality of many of the places around the world that we're exploring is related to some kind of a temple principle. That is very, very important and should not be underestimated. What would be a more important structure to create than that? That's the question that I ask. If
Yeah.
people think that that's not a good use of those, what else would you do? What else would you make that would have a greater purpose than that? So getting back to what Lydia is doing, we are exploring the properties of each site from the lens of archaeology, of geology, right? What kind of stone was it built out of? Well, the stone has mineral properties within it that have energetic properties. How were the stones designed and placed within structures to map things like the movement of the sun? We know that many of the sites around Vaughan are solar temples. We see sun symbols shown. We see the way that they're built. For instance, Ionis, the opening of the Susi temple, the inner temple, faces directly west, meaning that when the sun's setting in the sky, it would come into the inner sanctum and illuminate what I believe is the altar and create some kind of a synergy of energy. And so we'll be going and exploring those sites with Lydia and Arturo to investigate those properties. You know,
Hmm.
why were they created like that? Why are these pillars placed in a square around it with an opening that has very specific type of stone, very specific location, like you mentioned, with spring systems underneath and stone that is highly magnetic or geomagnetic properties to it.
Right.
We see that constantly. For instance, at Napa and Glacia, right next to Ollantaytambo, it's well known that if you take a compass and you put it on top of the central three doorway stone, the compass spins because of the magnetite present there. So you have these geomagnetic anomalies present at these locations that may play a very big role in why they were chosen in the first place and what kind of properties that these ancient people were looking for enhancing.
Amazing. So when do you expect, or would you predict that this documentary is going to be released to the public? Because you're still heavy into it, so it could be another couple of years, right?
No, 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 definitely not. We had initially planned on filming in 2024. It didn't happen, but it was a godsend because
Yeah.
we had the team doubled. We had all kinds of experts join that we didn't have. We ended up making major new discoveries and connections that led to the underwater Vaughn work being one of the focuses now of the documentary. But not only that, everything was coming together that needed to. It wasn't time yet. And so subsequently, we're now in the process where everything will be filmed in 2025. And the plan, and this is the hope, is that the documentary will be released before the end of the year. And we're going
Oh,
to go through film festivals and hopefully have some specific theatrical releases. And then
yeah.
eventually we're going to find a good home for the documentary on something like Netflix or
Ha!
Amazon or something. Well, we'll figure out where the right home will be for that.
I hope it's Netflix because they have a very good audience for just what you're doing. So it's
Well, I
perfect.
have to give high praise to Graham Hancock for his
Oh,
first
yeah.
2 seasons of Ancient Apocalypse. He paved the door to open it up. And like I have talked about is Graham has done great work to establish this and open up the door to it. Now what we're doing is taking it the next step further.
Yeah.
Now we're connecting symbols, connecting the sites in a way that has not been done yet. And so
Mhm.
I think it would be a great home for it to live, and we're hoping that it does end up somewhere like that.
Yeah. As we conclude, Matt, you're a research investigator and you're excited about finding ancient history, but what would you like to leave the audience who's following along with you? Why is it important to rekindle and reestablish these ancient civilizations?
You know, one of the profound things that has come out of my conversations with Randall Carlson is this idea that what we see left over is not simply just luck of the draw remnants and it's like, oh, maybe we can glean something from it, but
Yeah.
more like a scavenger hunt of ancient knowledge that was deliberately left and buried in many cases. That's a key point, not random. Places like Ayanis have been shown, evidence is showing Ayanis and Kefkalesi was deliberately buried by the Urartians, meaning they knew it was very important and they were in a volatile time period and they buried it for a completely different time, like a time capsule.
Hmm.
Now, that whole idea, I think, is profound because so many people believe that if we're going to understand where we're going in the future and the knowledge of who we're going to become, it's about just going forward. But I think it's really about going back. Because if this civilization that we're exploring had all the answers and mastered esoteric knowledge, mastered building and the connections that they had with like almost like divinity, I want to use that word. It was like they were like divine. If they knew that, then if anything, our journey of connecting and being divine with enlightenment and concepts in connecting to source, really forget about technology.
Yeah.
I don't really care about that. I care more about Earth technologies personally. But for us to have a true understanding of our potential, who we really are, what we can become, the answers are in the past because they left them behind. Again, that was their language. Let's leave behind the most divine knowledge of everything, the universe, into these structures, both in terms of how they were built, the symbols within them, and the things left behind from them, like their energetic structures.
Mm.
I think what we're looking at, Cliff, is not just ancient knowledge about us understanding who we are and our power, but through the sacred geometry architecture and energies of how they were built, it fundamentally changes everything that we build in the future. I
Mm.
mean, everything, the environments that we exist in, like almost like creating magic with like a spring flowing through with sacred stones and sacred energy. Something happens when you do that, Cliff.
Yeah.
Something emerges, and they mastered that. That's why it's so much bigger than just the human potential through our energy and consciousness. Imagine understanding that if you create certain structures with specific types of stone that have energetic properties,
Yeah.
you can unlock something.
Yeah.
And we are just beginning to understand that we are unlocking magic that has been forgotten from long ago.
Really exciting, Matt. Real fun to hear what you're up to. Give us your website and your other social media sites that we can go check into.
Please go to my website, thestageoftime.com, and my YouTube page, channel, Matthew LaCroix. And I want to point out if that I'll be hosting my first tour that I've done yet that we're going to be doing hopefully every year. But September of this year, I will be hosting a tour in conjunction with Paul Wallace to the Lake
Oh,
Vaughan region with all these Ayanis and Kefkalesi, some off-limits private sites where you get to come along with the journey and actually make history. Because again, like I've pointed out, because archaeologists have not put a lot of emphasis into certain megalithic stones that have characteristics that point towards being from this lost time period, everything's the same. And so a lot of them, Cliff, when you're walking around these sites that are not tourist sites at all, there's barely any infrastructure, you can find things, not things you'll remove, but you can find things sticking out of the ground that are part of unlocking this ancient history. And that's why we are offering a unique type of tour where you can help uncover history yourself and help find these things so we can catalog them and then go back in future trips and collaborations with archaeologists and do ground penetrating radar from drones and be able to lead and be part of future expeditions to fully uncover the mysteries of these ancient places.
yeah, and having Paul Wallace along too with his perspective on Eden is fascinating. I had him interviewed him a few months ago, and what a bright star to discuss our ancient past. So fantastic, Matt. Hey, well, listen, as always, a real pleasure having you on the program, man. When the documentary is released, let's have it, highlighted here and get the word out.
That would be great, Cliff. I really appreciate this conversation. Thanks, my friend. Join me September of 2025 for a tour of the Lake Vaughan area of Turkey to explore its ancient megalithic ruins. You can sign up on my website at thestageoftime.com. We'll see you there.